Good afternoon, Jolette Fourie. Welcome in my room today. I invited you specifically because you've got 37 years experience in child protection or working as a social worker, but many, many years in child protection and also being an expert in child protection. So very welcome this afternoon.
Thank you, Sanette. It's a pleasure to be here and to share something of what I know and experienced with others. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Jolette. So my first question to you is, why is legislation so important for child protection social workers to know?
Social work is a profession, and in any profession, one of the fundamental characteristics is that we as a professional, you need to have expert knowledge and expert skills. So the knowledge of the Children's Act is very important. It is part of our profession. We cannot be a profession, for example, if we don't know legislation and don't know how to interpret legislation. We are mandated by the Children's Act to provide child protection services. And then when we look at our Constitution, there's children's rights enshrined in the Constitution. But those children's rights, we also see in the Children's Act. The Children's Act is a children's rights-based piece of legislation. And in the Children's Act, it is very important that we know the Act, the articles in the Act, the sections in the Act, the regulations, as well as the norms and standards in this piece of legislation. It is very important to, for example, know what is meant by the best interest of a child. If we work with a child abuse case, we would find the definition in the Children's Act. The Children's Act gives us parameters for child protection services, how to provide child protection services. Another issue is that the Children's Act guides our investigations for the Children's Court, whether it's a Children's Court investigation or an extension report. It guides our professional practice. A layperson cannot do a children's investigation for the Children's Court or do an extension order. So our expertise in the Children's Act is such a responsible work that we need to do, and we should treasure this, being an expert in the Children's Act. We also assist the court to make decisions, assist the court to make a finding and to make an order, whether it's a Children's Court order or an extension order. And I think sometimes we forget what an important role this is for a social worker. Who else goes to the Children's Court with a Children's Court report or an extension report or a Form 39? It's a social worker. So it's very important that we know the Children's Act very well. If we know the Children's Act, it also helps us that we don't have long debates and that we don't flounder and that we are unsure about what to do. It helps us to be more confident in our social work practice. It also helps us to motivate to the presiding officer, to an attorney, to a police officer, what way we think we take in terms of protecting a child.
Jolette, can I just stop you? Can I just stop you there quickly, or do you want to do another point quickly?
I just wanted to have, I think, two other points. Yes.
Okay, before I forget, because you said so many important things, you mentioned the Constitution. So child protection social workers should need to know Section 28 of the Constitution.
Yes.
It tells us what rights do children have.
Yes.
And what's interesting, it comes through into the Children's Act. From the beginning, and we honor the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, as well as the African Charter, by our Constitution and the Children's Act. So we are there. And something else you said is you need to know the definitions. So the definitions are in Section 1 in the Children's Act, and we as child protection social workers should know. We must go frequently back to Section 1. That we don't think we know, we understand a term, but let's go and look what the term says. Yes. And then you also said something, you have to read the regulations. You have to read the norms and standards. We cannot just read this Children's Act. You also mentioned forms. So we have to have, read wider to understand what the Children's Act is about. So thank you for that. And I hope the people listen and take that to heart. Okay, your last 2 points about the legislation.
I think the last 2 points that you've touched on, that is when there is training on the Children's Act, we should try to attend training, to do refresher courses. There's new amendments on the Children's Act that we need to understand. And then read publications on the Children's Act. There are publications on the Children's Act. It also, some of the publications assist us to interpret and help us with the interpretation of the Children's Act. Yes, okay. I think that's about it. Thank you.
So what you're saying is that we have to further our knowledge the whole time. We cannot be stagnant. You know, some people still talk about the Child Care Act, and I think, okay, 11 years later, are we still talking about the wrong act? And some of them are stuck on certain sections in that act. So it's constant. We have to refresh ourselves constantly. And even myself, who really goes into training and knowing legislation frequently, every week I learn something new because I keep on reading. Yes. Oh. So thank you for that. Now, as we know, child protection work, one of our main jobs are to write reports for courts. And not just for courts, but also perhaps for other organizations, for a child and youth care center, background report, and so forth. So what guidance or tips can you give us about report writing?
Thank you, Sanette. Report writing is part of the social work profession. We write reports. We have to be happy with that and make peace with that. We have to write reports. And when you in the profession, report writing is, of course, one of the important functions. And the second point is that when we write reports, we give the court or the child and youth care center a picture of this person, this client, how this client is functioning. We give a picture of the client in the social environment that the client is functioning in. How is this client coping with life in general? Then report writing assists us to organize our thoughts. We have a lot of information, there's a lot of facts, but we need to organize that into a professional report in order for us to go to the court with confidence. Knowing what this client system is all about, and to give us confidence to go to court. We need to, another point is, what do we record in a children's court report, or a report for us other social service professional or other NPOs that works with the child. The Department of Social Development usually has a format for report writing, which we need to adhere to. And I think most of the child protection organizations also has that kind of a format. It is very important that we look at sources consulted, references, that we record services provided, And I want to go back to sources. Sometimes we read reports as supervisors where the social worker would just give a rendition of what the client said, what the client wishes, and so forth. But we need to verify that. And we cannot have in sources only, for example, the foster parent, and perhaps one other source. We have to look at other sources. Is this person a churchgoer? Perhaps we should then contact the church. Perhaps we should contact the ward councillor. Perhaps we should contact another social service professional. So the sources is very important. Another issue with regard to report writing, once we give all the information and all the facts, we need to get to an evaluation and a plan of action and a recommendation. So report writing assists us with that. And it is very, very important that we give ourselves enough time to write the report and give my social work supervisor enough time to quality assure that report. Yes, I would think that is very important. Let me just check if there's anything else. Yeah, the best interest of the child should be a golden thread in a report, especially if it's about the actual protection of a child. Then we need to think, we need to reflect. So often, we need to write the report and then read through the report. So a report writing should never be a very hasty activity or task that we need to finalize. We need to be clear in report. We need to quote the correct theory, the correct sections in the Children's Act.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Guard against cut and paste. It's so nice nowadays to have your computer or your laptop, but guard against cut and paste. It can be very embarrassing if you cut and paste and information is incorrect. And the last thing I wanted to mention is about the Fourie Act. Look at, I think Sanet will give the trainees a handout about the Fourie Act, but be conversant with the Fourie Act and the contract between the social worker and the client system. Thank you.
Yes, you know contracts. I see young social workers don't do contracts anymore with their clients, and that is quite a big problem, because that is where all this information should be in. Something important you also said is Section 7, the best interest of the child. And do we really use that in our report writing? Of course we should, because that is what it's all about. The whole Children's Act is about the best interest of the child. And then something else that you also said is that you're giving a picture to the court. I always tell participants is the presiding officer should sit on the bench, close his eyes. When you read, you should see it like a movie playing out in front of him, how the house looks, how the finances are, do they go to church? So that is what our task as child protection social workers are, is to write a script so that the audience can understand what's going on. Yes, so thank you for that. So last question I want to ask you. Now we know our legislation, we've done our report, now we go to court. And that is where many a thing fall flat, because social workers do not know what the courts expect, how to conduct themselves. What guidance can you give us about this?
Thank you for that question. I think we must refer to court etiquette, the persona of the expert witness and the court environment. So let's look at etiquette. I think an easy way or a simple way to look at this is what is proper conduct when you go to court? What is polite behavior when a social worker goes to court? So that is basically what etiquette is all about. I want to share something about the court environment. The court environment is a more formal environment. We need to be respectful in this environment. So if we don't behave respectfully, we cannot expect the presiding officer and the clerk of the court and so forth to also be respectful towards us. We need to be dignified in terms of our profession, and we need to behave in a dignified manner. Another point is how we dress. I think every social worker should sit down and decide, this is how I want to portray myself in court in terms of dress. We don't say that you need to dress and look exactly like some of the attorneys, very formal, but I don't think it's proper to go to court with the jeans, with the cap, with a t-shirt, with slogans. You need to dress in a way that the court can see that you do respect the setup at the court. Another thing is, what I really recommend is that when we enter the court, I don't think the courtesy is really that important, especially in the children's court, but at least not towards the presiding officer. Catch the eye of the presiding officer and nod before we enter the court. Be clear and know how the presiding officer wants to be addressed. Usually in the children's court, it would be your worship or your honor. And strive for constructive relationship with all the officials in the children's court. I think that is what I want to say about the court environment.
How important is it to honor a court date?
Yeah, I'm going to speak about the persona of the expert witness, and I think one of the first things I wanted to say is that we honor court dates. That should be the norm. And if we cannot honor a court date, we have to make an arrangement with the clerk of the court. We need to be on time. We need to be confident. We need to be credible, and we need to be, present ourselves and our report, that there's no room for debate about what is in the children's court report. The best word is contradiction. We should not contradict ourselves in the report. I think there's quite a bit of issues that I'd like to share. Is sometimes we get into a situation of being cross-examined. Be prepared for that you might be cross-examined, especially if there's an attorney, or the presiding officers will ask you questions for clarity. So you need to be prepared for that. So prepare well, remain objective, remain analytical when we are in court. Promote the legislation correctly. So it's a good idea just take the Children's Act with you, because sometimes when I get a bit stressed, I would even forget, oh, your best interest of the child is in Section 7. But take the Act with you. So if you need to refer to the Children's Act, you have it with you. Be calm and collected and poised in the court. Your tone of voice especially is very important, because sometimes I know when I get a bit stressed or a bit anxious, my voice, my tone might go higher. Listen to the tone of your voice and just speak normally when you are in court. Don't cry, don't laugh, just control your emotions very well. Because sometimes an attorney might ask you something that is very upsetting or makes you angry or anxious, even the presiding officer. But just actually identify that you're anxious now, but I'm not going to show that I'm anxious or angry or upset.
I think there you as you said, prepare. If you know there's going to be attorney, you can perhaps role play with your supervisor or colleague, and that they ask you certain questions that you can be prepared, to present yourself in court and be professional. But while we're talking about preparation, all court cases, you need to prepare yourself, even if you go for a normal children's court, because you don't know if it's your normal presiding officer you're going to get that day. Perhaps it's somebody new. And that is why you need to take your act with you. But we must not forget to prepare our clients. We must prepare the child. We must prepare the parents and the foster parents, and they must know the content of your report.
Yeah, the content of the report and your recommendation, the client, the child needs to know that before it is presented to court. The other issue is the report should not be given to an attorney beforehand. It should not be given to the media at all. So if an attorney wants the court report, we usually refer the attorney to the children's court and say, if you want the report beforehand, the report is at the children's court for you to access.
Okay, that's actually a very good tip.
The other issue is that address the presiding officer, even if there's not an attorney, but you're in court. You always focus on the presiding officer, answer the presiding officer. Sometimes the clerk of the court is in court, would ask questions, but the social worker always addresses the presiding officer. And when you need to leave court, you ask to be excused.
Yes.
From the
or wait for the presiding officer. So if you say address the presiding officer, it means you look at the presiding officer.
Yes.
Doesn't matter who asks you the question.
Yes.
You answer the presiding officer.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Yes. Do you have any other tips for us?
No, I think that's what I can think about now. Okay. Perhaps another tip is, when the presiding officer asks the social worker something or the attorney asks something, and you're not 100% sure, you can ask for them to repeat. You can take time to think about how you want to answer it. You don't have to rush in terms of the answers, and be concise and clear. When I was an inexperienced social worker in court, I wanted to talk. But the thing is, listen to what is asked and only answer that question, because sometimes, especially with some attorneys, the more you talk, the more they find something else to ask and something else to ask. So that was the last tip I wanted to share. Thank you.
Okay, so what you're actually saying is that if they ask you a question, try to answer in as little possible sentences. Okay, yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Jolette, for your time and to share your experience. Your 37 years is quite a long time. And I hope you enjoy being at home now. And looking at other alternatives to spend your time and not just social work. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And perhaps we'll see you again. Thank you, Jolette.
Thank you, Sanette. It was a pleasure to share with you. And it makes me excited about the social work profession, and all best of luck with the training. I hope it goes very well. Thank you.
Thank you, Jolette.